Everybody then is accounted for and marked. Okay, so all right. Let's begin with a prayer. This prayer is from Saint Teresa of Avila, and it's just called "Let Me Serve You." She prays, "Govern everything by your wisdom, O Lord, so that my soul may always be serving you in the way you will and not as I choose. In the way you will and not as I choose. Let me die to myself so that I may serve you. Let me live to you, who are life itself. Amen."
Amen.
Well, let's. I was going to say some things about the assignment at the end of class, but let's do that now and get it out of the way. Because if you have questions or anything, because we were talking about that while some of you weren't here. So that's like the meeting after the meeting, and so we'll just kind of talk about the assignment now. The assignments, I'd like the assignment sometime, 7 to 10 days after the last class, and then class number 5 is a week from today. So as long as I have them like 7 to 10 days after that, because I really like to read them over well and make comments on them, and because you deserve me to make comments on that. So you can get them in right away, or you can use that 7 to 10 days to get them to me, and then I'll read them pretty quick and get comments back to you within a week after I receive them. So as I was saying before, Robert Moore and I were talking a little bit about this. Make them simple. It's a walk through the Old Testament. Tell the story of the Old Testament in your own words. And I gave you the talking points. And a way you could do it, like I suggested, is get yourself a recording stick and tell the story to a friend, or a spouse, or a neighbor, somebody at your church, and sit down, and you can have your notes in front of you, but tell the story of the Old Testament in your own words. So then write it out. I'm not looking for Bible quotations. I'm not looking for footnotes. I'm not looking for a lot of annotations. I'm looking for your story of the Old Testament, so that you can use that, as I've said before, to teach an adult Sunday school class, or a high school class, Sunday school class, confirmation class, an adult Bible school class, something like that. So you can use, because you have all the information before you. You have everything. But I'd like you to tell your story of the Old Testament. So make it something that you can use. Okay, questions? Anybody have any questions? If not, we'll.
I did.
Yeah. Okay.
Just real quick, because what I was doing is I did put in references, like for a verse and a chapter, just so that you could stop and go back and read that specific.
Yeah, and that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. You can do it any way you want to. If you want to use scripture passages, that's fine. Just so it's how you want it. Make it your own, so it's meaningful for you. Okay.
Our last class meeting where we meet like this will be next Monday. Is that
correct? Already. Yeah, we have we have the book of Job, and Catherine does a really, really great job with that book and with Psalms. So I don't forget, when you do the Psalm lecture, what we're going to do with that is next week. And in fact, I think we might talk about Psalms first, because it'll be a good way to start the class. I'm going to ask you to tell the class what your favorite psalm is, and why? The only psalm I don't want to hear is your favorite psalm is Psalm 23, because I don't want everybody doing Psalm 23. So do something other than Psalm 23, but a favorite psalm of yours and why you like it. Just why you like it. And Psalms are really nice for devotions. I mean, I use in my own life, personal life, I use Psalms as my personal devotions. And when I have devotions with my staff, we do Psalms. We read a Psalm. And we might talk about it. We might not. When I do devotions with my church council, we do Psalms, and Psalms they're just an excellent devotional tool. But Catherine does a nice job with both Job and Psalms, explaining the kinds of Psalms and so on and so forth. So you'll enjoy that. Okay, Jeremiah. Let's just start out. I want to hear from you about Jeremiah, but one of the things that Ralph does is well, first of all, Dr. Klein says that he objects his call because he feels inadequate. But and then he says, though, in what ways, in the questions that he asks, his first break, I think it is, he says, in what ways have you been called? So do you feel called to your vocation? Or in what ways have you been called? That's how he put it. In what ways have we been called? Or what ways have you been called? Do you feel you've been called? Talk about that for a few minutes. Anybody want to share? Let me start. Because as a preacher, a lot of people during my pastorate have asked me to tell them about my call. And my call was, oh boy. It took place over a number of years, and not when I was young, because I went to Luther College in Decorah, Iowa. I met my wife there. After we graduated, we got married. She taught school in St. Paul, Minnesota. And because I was always a churchgoer. I mean, I always liked the church, and I always was active in some way in the church, especially with music. And I was active in the youth group way back then. It was called Luther League, remember? And but I was always active in youth ministry and such like. And so when my wife, I was going to go to graduate school in history, African history. But then when my wife, Susan, got this job in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I knew there was a Lutheran seminary there, I thought, well, I'm going to go to seminary and work part-time so I can be a better layperson. So I can, just like you're doing, you're going to school right now, becoming more effective lay people. And so I did that, went for a year. And then I decided, well, I'll go for another year. And that's kind of how my call to my vocation happened over a period of time. And I thought, this is for me. I really feel called to the ordained ministry. I feel called to do this. And so that's kind of how it happened to me. When I was a kid, a lot of, because I was active in the church, a lot of people, and both my parents were active. And my dad was a typical active church person, president of the council and all this, president, head of the building committee, all that stuff. But people would ask me if I was going to go to seminary, and I would always say no. I was going to do that. I was going to do something else. So my call to my vocation was gradual over a period of time. And I think that one's call, if you feel called to a ministry, a vocation, everybody has a vocation. everybody, no matter what we do, because we're baptized, everybody has a call to a vocation, no matter what it is. Because no matter what you do, you can do it, you can be God's hands and do God's work. So anybody want to talk about that in your own life? Yes.
I'm happy to.
All right.
Mainly because it resonated with me when he talked about Jeremiah being how he and most in the Bible object to their call.
Yeah.
and I get is called, or we wouldn't be here. And but over the years in different capacities, typically, there's different call stories I have in different ways. I'm sure we all do. But the thing that resonates with me is that when we have that nudge, that call from the Holy Spirit, I guess my first reaction is kind of, oh, not me. I'm not worthy. I can't do that. And I run the other has become evident to me is that if God is behind it, he keeps putting things in front of you and putting it in front of you and putting it in front of you, and until you know follow, I guess, some things quicker than others. But this past week, in conversations with my pastor, just talking about the word authority and giving authority and the differences between the sources of authority in our call is in God, and God promises to be with us. It was in the lesson, and that just really speaks, because if we're the first ones jumping up and down and saying, "Oh yes, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that for God," then I question sometimes for myself whether indeed that is a call. But it tends to be more of this gentle coaxing and shoving, and then God leads you where God wants. It's never a one and done. God says once and walks away. It's constant.
Right.
So that's
Yeah.
been my experience.
We're called every day. Yeah. And I think your comments are proven out. If you look at just our seminaries, probably half the students now are second career people. They've struggled with this call over the years, and finally, but see, the thing is you can have a legitimate call without going into the ordained ministry also, and
Yes.
so by the way, is your screen freezing up every once in a while?
Yes.
And I think that's me, because I'm at the Rostered Leaders Conference here, and my internet is not the best here. It's okay, but it's not you, it's me. Using every once in a while, it blips a little bit here, so sorry about that.
Yeah, it's not too bad. We can deal with it. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I think one day a long time ago, I was talking to a friend of mine who happened to be the vice president of Connecticut General Insurance Company, and he was my guest speaker when I was in camping ministry. I was in camping ministry for a while when I was younger, and he was my guest speaker for family camp that week, and he was struggling with a call. He was asked to become the president CEO of it's now Truist, or not Truist, Thrivent Insurance Company. But then back then there was two companies, Lutheran Brotherhood and Aid Associates for Lutherans, and I think he was asked to be the president CEO of Lutheran Brotherhood. But at that time he was vice president of Connecticut General Life Insurance Company, a phenomenal Lutheran Christian, a phenomenal person, and phenomenal singing voice. And in fact, he was a cantor for his local Jewish synagogue in Connecticut. What's the Hartford, Connecticut? He lived near there. And I told him, I just told him, I said, I said, you have such an important vocation where you are now. I said, you really think seriously about going to Lutheran Brotherhood, which is more of a Lutheran Christian organization. I said, where you are now, you are so important where you are now, because his job was to vote all the proxies all over the world, wherever they had investments. And I said, you're way more effective doing what you do now as a layperson, I think, I thought that he had a phenomenal ministry because he had such an important job, with business enterprises in developing countries and so on and so forth, and very, very effective. Anyway, anybody else want to share about call? Yes.
I'll do. Well, I had, been getting involved in our church more and more. I was on the council and things like that, but I was always looking for something else to do, and I didn't know what it was. I didn't know how I wanted to serve, and so I got my opportunity to represent our church at the Synod. And I looked around and I saw all these ways, and I saw all these different things that were happening in the Lutheran church that I didn't see, in the daily or weekly ministry at the church. I saw all these different ways to get involved. And that's when I felt my call to the Diakonia program. I just happened to be there, and I was looking around, and I'd been looking for something to do. And then when it was just one of those little minutes to do about the different things that go on. And I saw the Diakonia program, and it was just like, that's it. It wasn't for me. It wasn't this big leading in or anything like that. When I saw that, it was just, okay, I know this is where I'm supposed to be. And it took me a little while to get here to figure it all out, but here I am, about six classes in, and let's see what happens.
Yeah, excellent. Robert, are you retired? Robert, are you retired from another vocation right now? I mean, are you
well,
still?
I'm disabled, and
Okay.
so I haven't been I consider myself retired now.
Yeah.
I'm of the retired age now, so I can just say that. Yes, I am retired, but no, this wasn't my first deal. No, I was an electrician for a lot of years, and
That's hard on the knees. That kind of stuff's hard on the knees and the back, especially if you're commercial. That's
35
tough stuff.
Yeah, and when you take that 35-foot fast way down off of a roof, that's a tough one.
Well, that's not good either. Yeah.
No,
I'm glad you're here with us.
you got that right.
Anybody else want to share before we move on?
Trudy was speaking.
Yeah, I think that for me, I felt called about 10 years ago to go into the Diakonia program, and was just and getting ready to start when I had quite a heart attack. Most of the time they'd call it a widowmaker, but that wasn't applicable for me. So after having gone through that and recovery, I thought, well, maybe I'm too old or fragile for my church to spend the money on that. That was 10 years ago. Now I'm older and less fragile, and we are in a position. Felt called again, but we came to be in a position where we have no pastor, we have no church, but we have a strong faith and a strong faith community. And I feel that if the rest of the congregation sees the faith moving forward, or moving to work with them and be for them, which I am wholeheartedly, then they'll be able to continue their faith a little bit better as well.
Yeah, your church got hit by the hurricane, right?
Right. Yeah. Ian,
I thought,
pretty much wiped us out. Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody else want to share? Yes. Judy, Trudy, did you want to share?
That was me.
Or who?
I
Oh,
was
yeah,
just,
go ahead.
yeah. Well, it's funny because I can look back on big things I was called to do and small things, and I think I can see it looking a period of years that you can see God's working on you, and I'm much easier for me to take responsibility or something with my church family, because I do think, well, this is presented and I'm not doing this by myself. I'm doing this because God thinks I can do it. But even with this program, I had wanted several years ago, I really was thinking about going ahead. And this year, I started the program, and the first thing I was just felt so compelled to go ahead and put my name down. And in my head, of course, the first thing I'm thinking is, this is the worst possible year. Do it next year. And I could not start it this year. So it's, there's just things that you get nudged, sometimes you get pushed. But I can see it a lot easier when I look back at how things happen.
Yeah, well, God said the same thing to Jeremiah. He said to you, he says, I am with you, right? God is with you.
Mhm.
Said the same thing to
Yeah.
Jeremiah, I am with you. Denise, did you want to say something?
I was going to. I'm feeling a little embarrassed about this. All of you guys are younger than me.
You say
Don't
I
bet on
felt
it.
I felt called. I would say 3 specific times in my life, and the first time, I decided not to do. I went to a Diakonia conference. This was before it was a lay ministry. They actually had women deaconesses. They were like nuns in the Lutheran church, except they were allowed to marry. I went to one of their conferences in my 30s, and I was fascinated with the women that I met and what they had to say and who they were and how they were serving. And I go through an interview process. I was recently divorced, and there were 7 white men, all married, that I would have to interview with. And I said, no way. Thank you very much, but God, I cannot do this. And I went back to school, got a master's degree, did a second career. And after the second career, my mother was very ill. I cared for her for 8 years. She had that. And after she passed, this is the 3rd time. And there was no reason not to. So the call stays with you. I think God continues that nudging that the word used earlier in a conversation. That nudging or that push, that gentle push, sometimes it's like a 2x4 over the side of your head. You eventually have to pay attention to it. You can't ignore it forever.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and
So
the same thing happened to Jeremiah throughout his
where
life.
I am now in the plot.
The same thing happened to Jeremiah throughout
Yeah.
his life. He had to be nudged continually, always,
Yeah.
just continually. He was nudged to do the things that he felt called to do.
But the other thing in hindsight that I've realized is it's more than a nudge. It's an affirmation that you are perfect just the way you are, and I want you. You can't turn that down.
no.
That's right.
The point I wanted to make to Robert is I was a rehabilitation counselor for several years, and no one's really disabled. We all
No.
have disabilities of one kind or another. Just look at our eyes and our ears as we get older. But no one's totally disabled.
No.
And
No.
that's something that I learned while I was counseling other people with disabilities.
Yeah. No, it just meant I couldn't do what I used to do. So,
That's all. Yeah, you
other than
move on.
that, I'm still breathing and walking on my own. So you know what? it's not a problem for me in that way. It's just a problem about being able to do some of the things I used to. So you know what?
Yeah.
You just don't do them. That's all.
So that's my story, is the nudging came to a point where there was nothing to stop me.
Yeah. Very
Yeah.
good. Do any of you want to share anything about Jeremiah? Have something burning that you want to talk about before we move on? Is there
Have
anything that?
a challenge with the reading in that I was getting confused over the period of time and who was the king when.
Mhm.
So I do have to read through that a second
Yeah.
time to really grasp it. And I
And
didn't
don't-
know if
yeah.
anyone else is having that challenge.
Yeah, don't be real concerned
yeah,
about dates and kings and who is the king when, because you have charts for that for later on. Don't be real concerned about that.
Yeah.
Dates, it's kind of nice if you know if you know the century. If you know it's the 6th century BC or whatever particular dates, don't be real concerned about, because that's why textbooks make charts, or you can get charts on the internet that are really effective. It's way more important to know the flow of things, for me anyway.
Thank you.
If you're worried about kings and charts, there are excellent king charts, and in the textbook. There are so many good charts in there, and you can always go online and print things out, make it easier for you.
Yeah, I had to sit there. It was like looking at a map and the chart, as to who was when, and then my reading in the second. It's like, okay, back and forth, back and forth.
Yeah. Don't be too concerned about that, because you can always have charts in front of you. Anything else concerned about Jeremiah? One of the things I liked about Jeremiah, I will be their God and they will be my people. That Ralph Klein kept on repeating that. I will be their God, they will be my people. And I've always liked in Jeremiah, one of the things that Jeremiah did, which I've always really liked, is the buying of that field. He bought that land, and Judah was going down. I mean, it was being destroyed. It was going down. The temple was being destroyed, and things were not good. But yet he goes at the behest of who was that? His cousin. His cousin has proposed that he buy this field, and he went and bought this field, even though Judah was being destroyed, the temple was being destroyed, and they were being taken to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar. I've always thought that was interesting. One of the things I remember, everybody remembers where they were at 9/11, right? And so if you recall where you were on the day of 9/11, one of the things I remember is, stock market, went dropped, the bottom dropped out of it, and so on and so forth. And I remember a friend of mine being Jeremiah, and he said, you know what, I'm going to go out and buy a bunch of stock. Just like Jeremiah bought that field, and I've always, go ahead. Yeah.
I said, I bet he's a multimillionaire now, or immediately after.
He might be, yeah. But Jeremiah did something very, very daring there, because he kept on saying no and yes, right? Jeremiah got really, really upset with Josiah, the good king, because of his reforms of the temple, and he accused Josiah of hiding in the temple and using the temple as a mask, because Jeremiah believed that Judah and Jerusalem and the temple had to fall before it could be restored again. So it was always no and then yes. So I've always been interested in that. And also, this is interesting too to me, and I've always thought that this was interesting, the fact that Jeremiah wants the people, once they're taken captive in Babylon, he wants the people to prosper and build homes and raise their families and do well. And why do you think that was? He wants the people and
Well,
go ahead.
he wanted them to prosper so they could have children and families to bring back to their land. I think he did it out of the thought that strengthen yourselves, keep your faith, you're coming back. So flourish now and bring that.
Yeah.
That was one of the thing that struck me about Jeremiah. And of course, he's saying things nobody wants to hear, which a lot of the prophets had to do. But I felt like he was really on the side of the Israelites. He was there with them with the fall. He got exiled. He tried to stay with them. He finally got back to Judah. But I really, maybe it just made him seem more real to me that he was so committed and really did. He just demonstrated to them through his life that was something I admired about how he approached it. He did it.
That hit me too, that even though they were about to be defeated and they were going to be exiled from their land, he tells them, hey, go prosper, wait, because this is good. You're going to be coming back. So if they're going to allow us to prosper and to, it's not like they were going into a refugee type camp status thing, prison or anything like that. They were being in their land. So go prosper, make all you can, be everything you can, make your families and all that, because we're coming back home. Let's bring it with us when we come, and that was, to me, that's like, yes, you have to give up sometimes to go forward. And, and he just committed and tried to get that with everybody else to accept that kind of attitude, that if they would just go and commit, they were coming back to their land. And I that really got me.
And of course, you can read about that in Nehemiah, the book of Nehemiah. Dr. Klein really didn't do anything on Nehemiah or Ezra, but Nehemiah is an interesting book because it covers the coming home period and so on and so forth. Another thing that we have in our lectionary is that's very familiar to us as Lutheran churchgoers is Jeremiah's New Covenant. It will be a covenant. It will not be a covenant, a regular covenant that will be broken, because this covenant will be written, on our hearts, and so that's very familiar to us in the lectionary, isn't it? Let's spend a few minutes on the exile. What did you think of the exile? Any comments about that? Anything that you heard that was interesting or that was new to you that Dr. Klein said about the exile, the remnant, the diaspora, how they were taken, and so on and so forth? Anything that interested you there?
Well, again, to me, it was that even though they were in exile, it wasn't a mistreatment. They weren't mistreated. They weren't, it was not like they were being taken as and made as slaves. They were still allowed to, have land. They were still allowed to, they could worship and things like that, but they just couldn't, it was just like, you have to go.
Yeah.
Go put you in prison. We're going to make you our slaves. Kind of like, it wasn't like going to Egypt, and being their slaves in that. This was more of just a, we're going to take you to a different land and you'll just kind of live as the same way. To me, anyway.
I think one of the things that always strikes me as interesting about the topic of the exile is to remember and recall that they took the best and the brightest, and they left the old and the feeble and the ill, and they took the healthy, the best, the brightest, and obviously that's one of the reasons they prospered in Babylon. And that's the way a country like that, like Babylon or the Persians or the Assyrians, especially the Assyrians, the Babylonians, said when they conquered, the way they conquered a land was they would go in and, the text we read, one is taken, one is left behind. I think it's Jesus who says that. And he's really remembering the exile. When one is taken, one is left behind. You'll be doing this, you'll be doing that. And all of a sudden, one will be gone and one will be left behind. Well, that's the way a country like Babylon actually conquered a country. They would take the best and leave the ill, the old behind, and so that's how they would actually destroy a country. So they didn't take everybody. They only took the best and the brightest. And everybody stayed behind. And you really note that when you read the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah is about the cupbearer, Nehemiah coming back. Xerxes, the king of Persia, allows Nehemiah to come back. He's his cupbearer to rebuild Jerusalem, the walls and of Jerusalem and the temple. And he allows him to come back, and he's working. And so some of the people in exile come back, of course, but he's also working with the people who were left. And they not always get along with one another because a lot of the people from Babylon come back, but you have a lot of the people that were left behind, and so they come together to do this work. And it's not always rosy, it's not always pleasant, but Nehemiah does get the job done. But to me, that's always interesting to remember. Sometimes we're asked the question, well, how in the world did, especially in the context of what's happening in the Middle East right now, how in the world did the Jewish people, the Hebrews, the Jewish people get all over the world? How they end up in Eastern Europe? How they end up in Russia? How did they end up all over the place? Well, and originally that happened because of the exile, the diaspora, because not all of them came back. And so they were. That was the beginning of the scattering of the Jewish people over other parts of the world. Which I think is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Always remember that and the reason why we call it the Middle East muddle, and this will probably never be solved with the Palestinians and the Jewish people, is because the Jewish people, remember, they were the invaders under Joshua. They came into the land, back into the land, and settle the land. And I don't, if you ever read Judges, and it's a bloody book, you probably, I don't recommend anybody read it, but if you ever want to read it, you find, in fact, you even have the tribes of Israel fighting one another, but they're also fighting the Palestinians. We say the Palestinians today. But it was the native people that were living there when Joshua brought the people back into Israel. I mean, yes, obviously the Hebrews were in Palestine before they went to Egypt and they wandered around the wilderness, but then they came back into the Promised Land, and so that what's going on in the Middle East right now has been going on forever, and it would be nice if they somehow could start to get along with one another, especially the leaders. But you have these people becoming radicalized, which is just awful to see Hamas do what they did. Anyway, enough of that homily. But anything else that interested you about the exile, Second Isaiah, the servant? The suffering servant passages. Yes.
One thing the textbook mentioned that Jeremiah and the prophet in Second Isaiah didn't recognize the poor people or who remain entitled to that land, even though they were part of Judah before everybody was taken. And I guess I didn't quite understand that. It wasn't like because I know the Assyrians had dumped a lot of non-Israelites back into Israel or the northern part, but the people that lived there at that time that were left, that they were seen more as squatters than as
Are you talking about the people in Israel or people in Judah?
the people in Judah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, yes, I think it's probably both and. Yes, it's probably both and. Yeah. I don't think it's an either or thing. I think it's a both and thing that yeah.
But that's what humans have done around the world through generations, is you have one group of people come into an area and subjugate the people that are currently there.
Yeah, well, yeah, it happened in this country.
It happened in India with the British and southern Africa with the British. It happened here in the United States with the Native Americans. So all I'm saying is, over history, that behavior has happened repeatedly with the people coming in thinking they have more power, which in men left behind either leave or killed or become some kind of slave person.
Yeah.
Well,
Yes.
that's probably because we haven't gotten God's message yet that we're supposed to love each other. We have a long history of failing on that one, you know.
Yes, I think that has a lot to do with it. I think, you know, sometimes we don't listen, and sometimes Satan has more control. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's a pattern that has repeated itself, and it's scary to see that happen every single time it happens.
What did you think about the arguments about Cyrus being anointed? An anointed one. Dr. Klein was suggesting, was saying that there were arguments about that. Whether a non-Hebrew, a foreigner, could be an instrument of God and act on behalf of God, as Cyrus apparently was doing according to the text, 2nd Isaiah. What do you think about that?
I thought that it showed a couple of things. At least to me, it showed a couple of things. It shows that God, whether we think people are good or bad, they still have God with them and in them, because it doesn't say God's only with the Jews, God's only with these people. So he used somebody who, the other part of it is he used somebody who might not have been interested in being that person, just as we may not have been interested in the call, as we talked about before. He used a person who might not have been interested in doing the work, do work for him. Maybe he didn't even realize that he with him.
Yeah.
That's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, I always, when I read that and think about that, I always think of C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia, and the last book of the Chronicles, which is the last battle. And there's a question that is raised: how can this person be of God? Because he really doesn't believe anything about Aslan. Of course, he's not heard a lot about Aslan, and but this man has a good heart, and so he's kind of like angels unawares, you know. And so, I mean, I'm a strong believer. It's my personal belief that God uses non-believers all the time, all the time. We just don't have eyes to see and ears to hear sometimes, and but that it just happens. You look at Cyrus, you look at Ruth. She was a foreigner, for crying out loud. But she was the great grandmother to Jesus. Look at the centurion at the cross. He was a Roman centurion. And he said, well, in one place, he says, this is truly a good man. In another gospel, he says, truly, this is the Son of God. Look at the Magi, the first, well, in Matthew anyway, the first to encounter the baby Jesus, and they were foreigners. They were not Hebrews. So apparently, God loves to use all kinds of people. What do you think about that? Do you know anybody who do you know anybody in your
Sorry,
life
Mary,
who
go ahead.
and do you know anybody in your life who you say, oh yeah, yeah, Sally or Joe or whoever it was, yeah, they're not believers, but I think God used those. I think God used him, or I think God used her. You ever see that happening?
I think God's very consistent in that throughout time, whether it's Old Testament, New Testament, that are least expected. And even in our world today, that God uses all people because God ultimately unites. And one thing about the exile story and to go along with it, this really strikes me is the fact that, and we can, I guess, even use that as within our own lives too, that when we have these things that are viewed as horrible things or terrible things, and not that those are odd, but when those things happen, much like the exile, when you look back on it, how God's presence was there and used that in relationship and to change the world. I mean, just the example of the exile forever after, the quotes of Jesus, quoting back to that time. And even just the fact that a good chunk of the Old Testament was written when they were in exile. It's those times when we're pushed up against the wall that we finally let go of our own sense of control and rely on God in new ways, that can be seen for in hindsight, per what Becky was talking about, even in her own
I think
call
you're
story.
right.
And I do think God uses all people. I mean, I work with a community meal, and we see all kinds coming in there, and just the transformation in people. Not that we, hit them over the head in love, how God uses love to transform, and the actions of people to transform people and bring people together in new ways. I think it's all around us when we really pay attention.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to that. I think God sees everybody on this planet as his. I don't think he's making distinctions. Oh, you were raised this way, you're loser, whatever. I think, and the person on this planet, whether you're in Hamas or not, you are God's, whether you turn away from him or whether you've ever heard him. I think he considers his creation everyone. So,
Yeah. Thank you for that. Anybody else want to share? Don't all talk at once.
I think that there's so many people that you hear say, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. And I think, well, geez, everything you do, most of your life is dedicated to something that's helping other people. And maybe you don't go to church, but if you think God isn't working through you, you are very sorely mistaken.
I believe that. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, I mean, stewardship has to do with everything we touch. So often we start to think that, well, stewardship is money, but it's not just money.
Yeah.
Stewardship, everything we do has to do with stewardship. Managing stewardship is steward, managing the sty, the manager of the sty, the farm, the house, the business, everything the family, everything we touch, our relationships, everything we touch has to do with God. has to do with stewardship, has to do with taking care of everything God has given us. And so everybody is involved, whether we're Christians or not, or whatever we are, whatever we do, we are a steward and doing something on behalf of the Creator. We're almost at the end of the hour. Anything for the good of the order on either the exile or Jeremiah? Anything that anything that you need to say before we conclude this afternoon? Anything at all?
I don't know if it is anything like that, but I just found it really interesting where that only in Isaiah for 66 times we see the Holy One of Israel, and then we don't see it anywhere else in the Bible, but there's 66 times in Isaiah. So what happened, or was it just so, I don't know, but that kind of got me.
And who is the Holy One of Israel? In
Yahweh.
that context. Pardon?
Yahweh, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would guess. That would be my opinion. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's weird.
I liked his concept about figuring out the best brother, sister, or parent you ever had.
Redeemer.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really good. Thanks for bringing that up. That was, I really enjoyed that because that's Ruth, isn't it? That's the book of Ruth. Boaz is the Redeemer, right, in the book of Ruth. And so I loved his comments about that he talked about that.
Right.
Yeah. Speaking of that, there, I think it was in the Hallmark Channel a few months ago. My wife and I happened to watch a movie on Hallmark Channel, and it was about a Jewish family, and it was a Hallmark movie about that, where the husband dies, and then his brother is obligated to marry her. They become the Redeemer. Robert, you're shaking your head. Did you see the movie?
Seen that one too, yeah.
And I thought, well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
It's kind of the book of, but it was. I mean, it's a romantic comedy, but it was interesting.
Yeah.
That whole concept.
Yeah, but probably know all too. So, I was going back to what you said about Cyrus. I was looking for what I had written down, and I took a couple things out of there, and just like where he told the people, the potter doesn't matter what to do.
Yeah,
and then the one I took out of is don't tell me how to defeat the Babylonians. I kind of got this covered. You don't have to tell me how to defeat them. So there was a couple things.
Right.
I was looking for my notes when you said that. I couldn't find it, but that's what I took out of it anyway.
I apologize for my bad connection here, because it's all my fault that it's kind of in and out a little bit, but I'm glad that you put up with this today. Sorry about that, but our last class is a week from today, 3:30 Eastern. And we'll do, I think we'll do Psalms first, and then the book of Job. And so let me close today with the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
And also with you.
May the Lord bless us and keep us. May the Lord make his face shine on us and be gracious unto us. May the Lord look on us with favor and give us his peace. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Today is Monday. Have a wonderful rest of your week. We'll see you a week from today at 3:30. Before we depart, anything else that any other questions that you have, or anything else you need to say? Otherwise, we'll say adios. Okay.
All right. Take care.
Okay. Take care.
Right.
God bless
See you
you.
later.
Bye.
Yeah,
Bye, everybody.
bye.
Bye.
Bye.